Everyone, my name's Emily Conway, and I will be presenting my final capstone presentation and findings. I have a little bit of a lost voice. I've been sick for a few days. Bear with me, and we'll get to the presentation. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about social media strategy and crisis communications response, which is the topic of my final capstone seminar project. My name's Emily Conway, and I hope you enjoy. So first, let's get to a little bit of background information. There have been many noteworthy advances in communication systems in the last 30 years. The rise of social media has actually led organizations to consider it as a tool for primary communication, as well as, specific to my capstone, crisis communication. Crisis communication is an important aspect of crisis management and also helps to dictate public perception of crisis, which is one of the most important aspects of crisis communication. Social media has become increasingly important and informative platform for citizens in the US as trust in traditional media has begun to steadily decrease. When I say traditional media, I'm talking about traditional news outlets and so on. The research I'm about to present plans to fill the gap of knowledge in the field of communications and public relations regarding best tactics to communicate with targeted publics efficiently and directly. Regardless of whether organizations are in crisis, all communication professionals, including myself, can learn what characteristics of social media make it the optimal platform for engaging with their audience. Now onto the problem statement. So even for the most organized structures, emergency situations and crises disrupt the typical pace and flow of information. The problem really remains the lack of knowledge about why an organization should or shouldn't leverage social media for crisis communication during emergency crisis situations. So specifically, I want to look into what are characteristics of social media platforms that make it the most optimal structure to rely on for a properly executed crisis communication plan. My thesis that I've come up with after synthesizing my research and analyzing it is that properly implemented social media communication is the strongest medium for crisis communication and ultimately can change the way that people all over the world interpret an event's threat to their well-being and security. So now on to the purpose of crisis communications. Although many agree on the definition of crisis communication, researchers have separate viewpoints on the ultimate purpose and goal of crisis communications. So first, they think it helps to control the flow of information. Specifically, Wigley and Zhang went into this. Second, they think it helps to develop and disseminate key messages to the media. Third, it helps to prevent or lessen the negative outcomes of a crisis. Tyke, in 2017, analyzed crisis communications and thought that this was one of their main purposes. So despite consensus that crisis communication helps manage crisis and criticism, some research, as you can tell, focuses on how it lessens negative outcomes of a crisis, while others focus on how it helps efficiently send messages to stakeholders and control narrative during a crisis. So before delving into how organizations should effectively use social media, it's important to recognize what challenges are presented to the public as emergency situations and crises ensue. The three major issues when this type of crisis hit are the following: the need for information, public's eagerness for involvement, and overall communication challenges due to the chaotic environment. So first, the need for information. Simon, Goldberg, and Adini in 2015 described the publics during a crisis as information seekers who use their own social networks to gain information. Not only do these researchers claim they are information seekers, but they also claim people will go out of their way to find information for themselves, learn about the crises, find family and friends, and reduce any uncertainty surrounding the issue. They will seek any available venue of information to understand the crisis. Second, public's eagerness for involvement. Beyond seeking information, the public also inherently wants to get involved in the response phase of an emergency situation. This public's parts in disasters has been studied by many sociologists even back in the 1950s, according to Simon Goldberg and Adini. They claim researchers have compared the physical convergence of people to even a geographical site after a disaster to the convergence on social media tools such as Twitter. Community members want to actively participate in crisis and disaster relief and rely on social media to do so because of what I call its inclusive rhetorical arena, which Tyke mentions in his study in 2017. Third, overall communication challenges. Another issue that commonly arises during crises is the loss of communication and communication challenges. Depending on the magnitude of the crisis, it is possible that the event can cause severe damages to the communication infrastructure. As more conventional means of communication fail during and after crisis, people have begun to shift towards relying on social networks for communication. One of the strengths of social networking currently, which I lay out, is that the number of people and the amount of content posted on the platforms is unlimited. So now I'll go into social media for crisis communication specifically. As technology advances, crisis communication strategists should rely on social media in addition to some of the other traditional media tactics historically used in crisis situations. Social media specifically differs from traditional media because of the way information is discovered, distributed, and consumed. So the popular social media sites I'm going to specifically reference are mainly Facebook and Twitter. However, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn are among others that are notable. These sites allow for text, videos, maps, photos, and other types of data to be shared and posted to the internet. So I'm going to specifically talk about some of the different purposes of social media right now. And there's 4 that I'm going to outline. 1, it facilitates a feeling of connectedness. 2, it's going to help to mobilize and organize populations. It's going to enable open and online exchange of information. It's also going to engage the public in conversations and interactions. So after synthesizing a lot of different research, there were 3 S's that stood out, which Alfonso, Gonzalez, and Smith specifically reference. And that is the scope, speed, and structure of social media, which makes it the strongest and most effective medium for crisis communication. So now, numerous natural disasters and emergency have proven that rapid and informational communication strategies can help to reduce negative consequences during and after a crisis. Luckily, in the 21st century, social media has effectively helped improve two-way communication between organizations. I want to talk about 2 different case studies, one of which had a poor communication strategy where social media was not implemented and also hadn't really existed as in popularity as much as it is today. And second, I want to showcase a study where social media was not only implemented, but really leveraged by the police department in Boston to effectively communicate with the public. As you can see, the 2 natural disasters and emergency I'm going to focus on specifically in my research are Hurricane Katrina and the Boston Marathon bombings. So for Hurricane Katrina, surprisingly, there were many warning signs of potential risk and threat to the greater community. Because Twitter didn't really exist until March 2006 and Facebook had just been founded in February 2004, social networks didn't have the user base or popularity to spread information quickly or compete against traditional news media. The threat and potential damage of Hurricane Katrina, which many of you know, destroyed neighborhoods and really dislocated a lot of different communities in New Orleans. It really didn't effectively reach potentially affected areas in New Orleans because of poor communication channels at the time. It failed, as Potts mentioned, it failed to create flexible open systems that would have allowed participants to add and edit content and developers to push and pull that information from databases that held it. Since the systems like the government websites and news outlets couldn't actually support this at the time, the ability for data to move forward into the state of knowledge that participants could then repurpose and redistribute to the community was virtually impossible. Now I'm going to talk about the Boston Marathon, which is an excellent case study to kind of promote different crisis communication strategies that can exist. First, I want to talk about why the Boston Marathon and specifically the Boston Police Department, really could leverage their social media platforms and actually reach the publics. This is because there were twisted and conflicting media reports from CNN, the New York Post, and other news outlets about, erroneous casualty numbers, wrong suspects, and that kind of helped make the Boston police Twitter specifically become the go-to source for citizens and the public. Since the Boston Police Department blocked cell phone reception due to the concern of further bomb detonation, many people actually had to rely on other communication forms that use an internet connection, such as social media. Boston Police Department personnel used Twitter to communicate with the public about street closures, take questions about needing volunteers, and about how to post photo evidence to their page. Although the Twitter page was the Boston Police Department's main page, also they leveraged their Facebook page, which had over 180,000 followers at the time. Boston Police Department's social media pages ultimately became the best defense against misinformation and the preferred method to communicate with the public surrounding the issue. The use of social media, as you can see from these two case studies in the United States for crisis communication, continues to expand and grow. Through the analysis of the failures of Hurricane Katrina and the Boston Police Department Twitter success story, it's clear that implementing proper social media systems will create a more participatory environment and also an efficient crisis communications plan. Adopting social media practices into a crisis communication plan should be widely encouraged for organizations or businesses, regardless of size. So now on to the solution. The two major crises, Hurricane Katrina and Boston Marathon bombings, have helped public relations professionals analyze these strategies and what led to their successes and failures, respectively. This has led to the solution that addresses the research problem. To build a successful crisis communications plan, an organization must implement a social media strategy to 1. Engage the public, 2. Avoid and correct inaccurate information, and 3. Create a trusted online community. First, I just want to talk, briefly on these 3 topics. For engaging the public, communication strategists must rely on two-way communication and engaging the public during crises to not only seem approachable, but to also use them as a resource while crises play out. As we know, information is valuable, and it's vital for crisis communication strategists to appreciate other people's input. Correcting inaccurate information is pretty self-explanatory, but it's crucial to kind of minimize the effects during a crisis in terms of public perception. And then building a trusted online community. If organizations can build this trusted, engaging online community on social media, they'll help to avoid the dissemination of inaccurate information and also help drive the conversation of the crisis. So recommendations. Further study is really required on 1, the participatory environment of social media. This will kind of help to understand the implications of creating all these conversations on social media before a crisis. Obviously, social media should be leveraged, but it's important to understand the consequences also of creating such a participatory environment that everyone can contribute and maybe dilute information. Also, demographics and psychographics of social media users, as well as their behavior during a crisis. This is important because we want to understand how they might interact on this network, and also how social media should be used to communicate different types of crises. For example, it's important to compare how it should be used for natural disasters versus internal business conflicts, etc. If this further research is done regarding the audience and behavior on each platform, crisis communications messaging will be even more customized and efficient. So to conclude, by leveraging social media platforms, public relations professionals and crisis communications teams create a two-way communication stream to avoid misinformation and engage their publics. Since influencing public perception is at the forefront of any organization's goals and strategy, social media is a crucial addition to organizations' crisis communications plans nationwide. Obviously, as a public relations professional, specifically an intern right now, but hoping to work in the field later, it's important to focus on something as dramatic as crises to really understand how public perception can dictate the field and can also be manipulated by platforms such as social media. Thank you so much. Here's my references that I've used in my research as well as my presentation. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you learned something today. Thanks so much.